the next 10 years for Brighton, I'd like to see us progress further in the Premier League. Our vision is to be a top 10 Premier League club and a top 4 Women's Super League club. Football doesn't always progress in a straight line. There's usually bumps in the road, and there were. Our first season in MLS was very difficult. Essentially all of the different elements of our business are human in many ways. And our use of technology is really there to enhance those humans rather than replace those humans.
Welcome to the Football Economy, where we discuss the finance, strategy, and stories shaping the game we all love. I'm Ibrahim. Today, we're joined by Paul Barber, a true architect of modern football, whose journey has taken him through the highest corridor of power in the game. He was the public face of English FA during its transformation time in the modern commercial powerhouse, worked alongside Daniel Levy at Tottenham, and made history as the first British executive to lead an MLS franchise with Vancouver Whitecaps. For the past 13 years, he's masterminded one of the football's most compelling success stories, transforming Brighton into a club once 28 minutes from extinction into European contenders. As CEO and deputy chairman, he's overseen Brighton's rise to the Premier League, expanded the Amex Stadium to 32,000 seats, built a world-class training centre, and generated over £500 million in player sales, closing a record £122.8 million profit in a single season. As an OBE holder and recent Premier League CEO of the Year, Paul's partnership with owner Tony Bloom has become one of football's most successful relationships. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. So let's start with your background from an early age. So if I'm not mistaken, you started off by washing cars as a kid. You've described yourself as very entrepreneurial at a young age. How did those early business instincts shape who you are right now in terms of running this major organization called Brighton?
Well, I had a very modest upbringing and didn't, as a family, have a lot of money when I was growing up. So working from a young age was not just something that I needed to do or wanted to do, but something I needed to do. And I enjoyed running a couple of small little businesses, one of which was washing cars. And that taught me the value of working hard, providing a good service, the importance of loyal customers and looking after loyal customers, and also making sure that you understood, not only what your pricing was like, but also what your costs were like as well. So, profit became a focus for me at a very young age.
Understood. You say profit became a very big focus for you at a young age, meaning that you have this entrepreneurial zeal, entrepreneurial mindset, and that's not gone away regardless of the different roles you've occupied. And,
I think sometimes businesses focus a lot on revenue, which obviously is important. But if you don't focus on costs as well, then profitability is much harder. So understanding, how your business works, both from a revenue point of view, but a cost point of view as well, is critically important. It sounds obvious, but, a lot of people will focus on the revenue and growing revenues as high as they can without really fully understanding what it's actually costing them to deliver those revenues. Football business, we can sometimes be guilty of that. It's very easy to focus on what you're bringing in, but sometimes harder to understand fully what you're spending in order to bring that in.
Yeah, well understood. When I look at your timeline of your career, it's very impressive. Coming from a marketing background myself, I know you started as a press and PR officer in 1988, the Royal Insurance, which is now called Royal Insurance. And basically, you were thrown into TV and radio at that time. And then in 1990, you were the public and media relations manager for Abbey National. And then in 1994, the head of comms, corporate comms, BHS. And then obviously you moved into Inscape. And then 1998, you were the director of comms for Barclays Bank, which is quite impressive. But during that period in Barclays, you experienced something sort of like business from a business lens. It's horrific in the sense that you saw 6,000 redundancies happen in one go. How does that affect someone as yourself, who I've come to know from my research has a very big premium or places a big premium of empathy? How have you been able to have that reshape the way you approach business decisions, seeing that happen to you at an early age in terms of what you experienced?
Well, I think having a communications background, first of all, gives you a good foundation to be a leader in any business, in any role, but particularly in a role in football where communication and the scrutiny on the game and the interest in the game is so high. but also working through the corporate world before coming into professional sport. I think it teaches you management discipline. It teaches you the importance of preparing well for big announcements, of having empathy with people that are going through a difficult time. You know, in the financial services industry, essentially a little bit like the football industry, we're reliant on people, and, we don't manufacture anything. We don't actually produce anything as such. People are a critical element of the financial services industry, just as they are the sports industry or the football industry. So I think when you're making 6,000 redundancies, as we did back then, you do have to learn how to communicate with the right words at the right time in the right way. You understand the importance of face-to-face communication, of having an open dialogue and a transparency, so that people feel as if they're not just a name or a number, that they are actually a human being. And that's important, I think, when you move forward all the way to the football industry and you look at fans. There are thousands and thousands of fans for all of the top clubs in the country. And it's very, very easy sometimes to almost dehumanize fans as one homogenous group of people that you don't care too much about. We try and take it the other way and try and maintain as much direct communication with our fans as we possibly can. And it's hard because as the club gets bigger, there are many more fans. It's not possible to see all of them face to face, but it's important to have some element of face-to-face communication as a football club.
Yeah, understood. And then after the Euro 96, you were asked by the FA to come in as an advisor to support the World Cup bid of 2006, which was an interesting time in its own right, because obviously you had the rise of David Beckham as a commercial magnate, and you coming in as a marketing expert or marketing professional in that sense. That would have obviously given the FA a tremendous lift, knowing that someone of your caliber was coming in and was obviously going to do things in a very unique and out of the box way. What were the learnings you sort of like learned during that period? Because obviously you definitely encountered some challenging experiences in terms of working with people who would not agree with the way you want to do things. But how were you able to sort of like stakeholder management, but also managing egos in that sense?
Well, it was an interesting time because football after Euro 96 was rapidly professionalizing. It was understanding its commercial value. It was understanding that many of its assets were brands in their own right. And they were looking at that time, the industry was looking to bring in people that had a far more experience in marketing and commercial aspects of running businesses. And, I've been fortunate that with my marketing education and working for major blue chip companies, I had that background, but I also had a love of football and an interest in football and a background playing football and coaching football, which was a great combination at that time because there weren't that many people that were moving into football with that kind of combination of skills and experiences. So I was very lucky. I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And yeah, moving into the FA in a full-time role in the late 1990s was a challenge because, the game was still evolving. The Premier League was still very young. The FA as a governing body had only just really recognized just how powerful the game could be, not just commercially, but also as an influence on society. So it was a brilliant period to be involved in football and marketing football. And I was very proud to become the first ever FA director of marketing. And, for me, growing up loving football as the most important thing in my life for many years, to suddenly be given the opportunity to be the person that's responsible for promoting the game across the country was just an incredible privilege and an honor, and something that I love to do every day. And even in this job now, many, many, many years later, 25, 26 years later, my first and foremost responsibility is to make sure the interests of the game are at the highest level at all times, make sure that we promote the game of football, make sure we make it as accessible as it possibly can be, not just from people playing the game, but people watching the game and enjoying the game. And all of those skills that I learned back then with the Football Association and even earlier in my career as a professional marketer still stand me in good stead today. And it's a real honor to carry on working in football as I do.
Yeah, it's a well expressed statement about what you've experienced during that time and what you take forward with you. I mean, you're well sort of like versed in understanding strategy and business insights, but trying to leverage those insights to shape what you want to impact as a goal. What I've noticed is obviously Richard Scudamore, who was the former CEO of the Premier League. He also, if I'm not misunderstood, had a refereeing background in terms of early on in his career. And coincidentally, or maybe not, you also have that. You've done your coaching badges, probably not well known. You coach at a decent level for youth level in that sense. And my question here is, does that actually shape the way you sort of like stakeholder manage the game itself from a CEO background, but also from a fan perspective in terms of how you try to manage expectations from the fan base and how you communicate to the audience or to potential partners?
Yes, I think it does. I think having an understanding of different facets of the game is important. I played the game until I was in my mid-30s. I coached for many years, as you say, with youth football. I refereed a limited amount of time just simply because I wanted to experience that side of the game as well, as did my son, actually. And I think, when you have different perspectives on the sport, it gives you a better understanding of where the different stakeholders are coming from in certain debates. And hopefully it gives you an important sense of perspective to try and mediate some of the more difficult discussions when emotions might be running high or when people have different opinions. And, these experiences, clearly, I haven't refereed at Premier League level and I haven't coached at Premier League level, but what a small amount of each of those things at a much lower level gives you is just a perspective on where sometimes coaches or managers are coming from if they're in a difficult position in the media, or if they're in a difficult position inside the club at a particular time, difficult run of results, they're having a problem with players, that they're having trouble with their own confidence because they've been on a bad run of games or whatever it happens to be. And likewise, when match officials maybe make the wrong decision, understanding them as human beings and understanding that human beings make mistakes gives you that sense of more, I suppose, understanding of their difficult position. You approach the challenges that you face in that scenario much more calmly. And hopefully you get to a resolution faster because you're looking at it through different lenses. Again, my primary job here as chief executive of Brighton is to represent Brighton's interests. But as I said earlier, we've also got a responsibility to promote the wider game and to protect the game.
Yeah, understood. I mean, also, when we look at your time during the FA, you pivoted and created this remarkable sort of like revolution called the FA Partners Revolution. FA Partners program, which was incredible at that time because obviously this is a new development during that time. And basically you were able to onboard partners such as McDonald's, Pepsi, Carlsberg, while protecting the FA Cup as your primary sort of like goal. If I'm not mistaken, you basically wanted to make sure that no single partner was able to have that sort of like hold or leverage on the sort of the asset, which is the FA Cup. And you wanted to just basically dissect it and have different parties basically there for partnership. And obviously that makes sense from a business lens. My question to you is, how were you able to sort of like convince these different groups, different partners about the potential for generation of revenue during these partnership programs with them?
Yeah, it was a very different program. UEFA had already done something similar, as had FIFA with the World Cup and European Championships and Champions League competitions. But for the FA, it was revolutionary. It was quite different. We didn't want title sponsors for the FA Cup or the England team. We also, at that time, wanted to focus more attention on youth football and women's football, which 25 years ago was nowhere near as popular commercially as it's becoming now, which was a very hard sell at the time. And I felt that the only way to generate additional income for the more or lesser profile areas of the game, such as women's football, such as youth football, such as some of the community work and grassroots work that the FA was doing, was to break up the old model, create a new one where you couldn't actually buy the top of the game. You couldn't actually become involved with the England teams or the FA Cup unless you also made a commitment to the lower levels of the game and the grassroots levels of the game. And it was a hard sell. And I think there were various people that doubted us at the time in the way that we were going about selling it. But we completed the program. We actually sold the whole program. We generated more income for women's football. We generated more income for youth football. We generated more income for grassroots football. We promoted some of the FA's lesser known competitions like the FA Trophy and the FA Vase and the FA Sunday Cup, just as much as we promoted the FA Cup and the FA Women's Cup. And the England teams became not just the men's England team that was important, but the women's England team that was important, and also some of the more junior England teams for both men and women. So it was a really enjoyable period, and we were working with some fantastic brands and some great people at those brands who believed in what we were trying to do and were prepared to back us during that period. So we generated a lot of income. A lot of those sponsorship deals were very profitable because of the way we structured the rights. And we also delivered great value for the partners by giving them great exposure across so many different FA assets. And it was a very, very good period commercially for the FA.
Yeah, understood. I mean, we can go deeper into the FA period, and it's well documented what you were able to do. Even the roadshow, taking the teams to different stadiums. Obviously, during that time, you were tasked with looking for a new stadium for the FA, and obviously the move from Manchester to a different location. But my question to you is the transition from the FA to the Ogilvy years, so the PR world group that you were a part of. At that time, you became the European CEO of one of the biggest, if not the largest PR firms, significantly because you're managing the EMEA. My question to you is like, this role is rarely discussed when people talk about your experience, but I think it's very pivotal and very important to understand that the person you are today, because obviously you were in charge of not just Europe, but also Middle East and Africa. Obviously it's a communication role, it's a communication firm, well storied. I just want to understand from your lens, what have you literally learned from your time during the helm as the CEO of this group? About leadership, not just during crisis, but leadership in terms of trying to will into existence a vision that you want for an entity, a club, or a group.
Yeah, it was a fascinating couple of years because I hadn't been successful in securing the chief executive's role for the FA. So my time there came to an end. I joined Ogilvy and Mather, one of the world's largest advertising and PR groups, headquartered in New York. I was responsible for the European division, which I really enjoyed because not only was it fascinating in terms of the clients that we had some of the world's biggest clients that we were supporting. But as you say, it covered not just Europe, it covered the Middle East and Africa as well. So getting to understand different regions, different cultures, understanding the different working practices across those countries, it meant that I had to sort of go back almost in my career to my experience at Barclays, where I also had responsibility for Europe, Middle East and Africa as well, to draw on what I'd learned there. Running a business of that size is complex in lots of ways, but the most difficult aspect of it is just simply having a common vision and a strategy that works across so many different territories and selling that vision across so many different territories to so many different people with different backgrounds, different aspirations, different cultures. So it was a fascinating time. And all of the while that you're doing that, you're also relying on your creative teams to deliver great work for your clients. And those clients, of course, ultimately pay many, many people's wages and many people's bills. So there's a certain amount of pressure when you're running an agency of that size to make sure that you're balancing not just the needs of your clients, but also your staff as well, because you're trying to get the most out of people to deliver great work. You want the clients to like the work. The clients need to pay for the work. So it becomes a very, very pressurized environment. And I think, again, it was a fantastic experience for me at a relatively young age to be exposed to that level of business. And I really enjoyed it, but I miss football. And the opportunity to move back into football full time with Tottenham Hotspur came around quite quickly. And that was the club I grew up supporting. So the chance for me to join a Premier League club, and particularly the one that I grew up supporting and that was close to my heart, was an opportunity that I had to take.
Yeah, and obviously we transitioned to Spurs, your time there. The task that was given to you, the brief, I guess, was basically we want to compete. This is from Daniel Levy, someone you're well familiar with. The brief is basically we want to compete with the London rivals, so Arsenal, Chelsea, on the pitch and off the pitch. And we want you to be the man who can shape our commercial activities and obviously our brand activities. You try to exploit that, and I think you did that successfully. But I'd like to ask you to talk us through how you leverage your sort of like your insights, your business acumen from your time at Ogilvy, and use that to sort of understand how Spurs should be best positioned from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective.
Well, I think one of the things when I went to Spurs, first of all, that I had an intimate knowledge of the club. I'd been going there since I was 7 years of age with my father, with my family. So I understood the club, I understood the brand, I understood what it stood for, I understand what the fans expected, I understood the kind of values that the club wanted to be known for. And that's a fantastic foundation to start with. If you then combine that with previous experience in professional football, plus the experience that I'd gained in a number of big companies, including Ogilvy, it then gave me the perfect launch pad really to look at Tottenham in a slightly different way. Do we need to upgrade and update the brand? Do we need to start looking at bigger, longer term partnerships that are more valuable once we've got the brand where we need it to be? And then, of course, if we can do both of those things, then we're generating the kind of revenue that the football side of the club can then invest on the field. And during that period of time, we did reinvigorate the brand. We did upgrade the stadium, albeit nothing to the level that the new stadium has today. But that also helped us bring in top players that then took us into cup finals, took us into European football again, and restored, I think, some of the excitement for the Tottenham fans that had been missing for some of the years before that, as the club had been going through quite a long transition when Daniel Levy took over the club. But again, it was a very long and hard road to do all of those things, engage the fans more, be more open, more transparent with the fans, to try and take them on a journey that the club was about to go on, which ultimately has led to not only the new stadium being built, but also a world-class training facility being built at Enfield in North London, and the club's recent relative successes. Winning a European competition again was just fantastic to see. So it was a very important part of my career, but it's also been a much longer journey for Tottenham Hotspur as a whole, because they're still on it. And some of the work that we did back in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9 is still being used today to continue Tottenham's journey. So it was a great period in my career, and one that I enjoyed very much.
Yeah, and just to hit the nail harder there, for people who are not familiar with your work there at Tottenham Spurs, you were pivotal in securing then the largest ever shirt sponsorship with Mansion.com. And obviously you helped create the One Hotspur membership program. So obviously these are wins that are still acting as tailwinds for Tottenham Spurs till today. So this is like a big deal for Spurs fans and obviously football fans to be aware of this, because this is pivotal to the history of the Premier League for a big London club to be shaped this way by yourself. But in terms of your time at Vancouver Whitecaps, obviously I'm familiar with the transition there, the reasons for why you moved to Canada. I've lived there before, so I understand the appeal of Vancouver. But obviously you mentioned a few things, so a few reasons for why you moved, your need to become the CEO of a club, of an entity, and obviously looking at your background, your history in terms of your work career, it made sense. And obviously the need for change in terms of giving your family new experiences. And obviously your son still stays there. Very good experience for your family in terms of education. But my question to you here is, during the time there, Steve Nash and the other co-founder of the club came to you and said, hey, we tried buying Spurs, it didn't work out for us. Levy wasn't interested in selling. We're still in a good terms with you. We want you to come in and shape this club. We want you to sell this club to Major League Soccer fans, but also Canadian fans, about the appeal for a Vancouver club. How did you sort of like understand the vision and how you felt that it could be translated into having the club become obviously a participant in MLS? That's one. And number two is, what were you going into this in terms of the mindset, in terms of what was your plan of action in terms of how you could position this club as a mainstay in MLS? Because it was a big jump. You mentioned yourself, it's like moving from maybe like 6 divisions in the English Premier pyramid all the way to Premier League. Like that's big. That's how big of a jump it is. So just in your words, how would you explain that?
Well, first of all, I got attracted to Vancouver by the owners. Steve Nash was one of them. Greg Kerfoot was another. They were very, Jeff Mallett, one of the co-founders of Yahoo, was another. They were very clear about their vision for the Whitecaps, very clear about the fact they wanted it run as a European-style club with men's and women's football academies. They were very clear about ideally building their own stadium, but if not, then refurbishing BC Place, which is a big stadium in the heart of Vancouver's downtown area. They wanted to make the club as successful as possible, as quickly as possible, which is hard because, football doesn't always progress in a straight line. There's usually bumps in the road, and there were. Our first season in MLS was very difficult. But I really enjoyed their vision and their passion and their energy and their determination to invest in something that was one of the oldest football clubs in North America already, but had fallen in recent years into more of a decline and playing at the much lower levels. So, I really admired their ambition for the club. And it was a great new experience, as you say, for me personally, but also for my family to live on the other side of the world. And I really enjoyed my time there. The first and most important priority was to generate income, as it always is in football. You have to start by bringing in revenues that you can then invest into the players themselves, which ultimately, if you get it right, can bring relative success on the field. And we worked very hard, I think, in those first 2 years in MLS to drive commercial revenues. I think we did 25, 26 deals in 24 months to give the club a fantastic commercial foundation. We not only moved stadium 3 times in that period, but we started to actually sell season tickets in vast numbers. And when we finally got ready to open in MLS, we had over 20,000 season ticket holders, which Vancouver have maintained, I think, to this day. So commercially, it was a great time. On the field, it was much more difficult. We decided not to go down a designated player route. This is where you spend a lot of money on a David Beckham or a Robbie Keane to help drive success for your club, both sporting and commercial success. We decided to adopt a different strategy where we had lesser known players and make use of our full roster. But again, it was just great experience to have to adapt your mind to not having football as the number one sport in the country where you're working. In Vancouver, in Canada, generally ice hockey is the number one sport. There's still a lot of love and interest and affection for other North American sports. And then there's soccer. So for me, as a former marketing director of the FA, to again have to switch back on to selling the sport first and foremost, getting people interested in the sport, getting people participating in the sport and then consuming the sport was just a real personal as well as professional challenge, which I really enjoyed. And then, of course, once you've done that, you've got to get them to buy into your club, your brand. And in Vancouver, we had huge competition from the Vancouver Canucks, who are the National Hockey League ice hockey team, who had a fantastic team at that time. They were flying really high. So we had a real challenge convincing the Vancouver public to come and watch us as well and spend money on us as well. But we did it, and we did it in good numbers, and we had a very, very good period there. And again, for me, I think the opportunity to return to the UK and to return to English football was something that I always felt I wanted to do. And, looking for the right opportunity to move back as a chief executive of an English club was always going to be, part of my career journey. And along came Brighton in 2012, and the move came about. And of course, here I am 13, 14 years later, still here.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously, we're going to transition to Brighton, which is probably the reason why a lot of people are going to be listening to this or watching this. But just to hammer the point on your time in Vancouver Whitecaps, because, this is history that people need to be aware of. We're trying to educate people here. Jeff Mallett, when he hired you, he basically said that much like David Beckham is a designated player, it's the same impact we're going to see on the business side of the equation. It's a big coup. So basically, you were, considered the equivalent of David Beckham on the business side. Obviously, the whole league were aware of the impact you could generate. And one of the big wins you had was getting Bell Canada as a front shirt sponsor. You had EA Sports as a partner, Budweiser, Kia Motors, the big bank BMO of Montreal. And these are all the wins that would like to educate the audience to understand that a marketer obviously has a business mind at heart, and the marketing is not just a nice to have; it's very critical to the business of a club or sporting entity. But now we transition to the Brighton years, and obviously the first question I have here is: I watched a clip where you were head to head with Tony Blue, and basically you were tasked with answering a few questions, and how you had a buzzer and different segments. It was quite entertaining, but it also gave me a glimpse into the sort of relationship you guys have. First of all, the first things that come out of that clip to me was you're both very, very competitive, more than you do. Obviously, Tony is very analytical, as you mentioned. He's a mathematician, trained math wizard. Obviously, he's a very good poker player. But you come across as very understanding of your sort of like your perceived background and awareness of where you are at all times. That's something that came across to me. But the most important thing to me was the trust that you guys both have for each other. And that leads to the beginning of the relationship, which I want you to tell the audience about in terms of the signed notes on a piece of paper and you emailing him for, obviously an official document. And that's a very interesting anecdote that I'd like you to go into.
Yeah, well, first of all, my relationship with Tony goes back a long way now, almost 15 years from the time we first met. And, we're almost complete opposites, whereas I tend to be much more brand and marketing and communications focused. He's much more numerate and much more analytical in the way that he looks at things. So whereas I tend to be quite good on the subjective discussions, Tony's very, very focused on the objective discussions. And therefore, as a combination, we work pretty well because, bringing those two things together, it's like the left side of your brain and the right side of your brain and the benefit of two people rather than one. So that relationship went well from the start. We got on well from the start. And I suppose the story that everyone likes to hear is my initial negotiation with him about taking the job. And it was very unusual because normally jobs, even at the highest level, tend to have a salary attached to them that you're either attracted to or you're not. Obviously, if you're not, you don't tend to be in the process. But in this situation, it was much more open. It was a club that was traditionally in the bottom two divisions of the English football pyramid, looking to play in the top division, and a chairman, a new owner who was looking to bring in a CEO to bring that vision that he had to life. And of course, I was not at that time working in English football. I was working in North American football. So there were not some easy comparisons for him in terms of salary levels and benefits. So anyway, we had a long discussion, and eventually at the end of the discussion, he said, look, I want you to join the club. I'd like to understand what it will take for you to join the club. And he gave me a piece of paper. He said, look, write down the kind of salary you're looking for, bonuses and any other benefits. I'll go away, and when I come back, we'll discuss it. And he left the room, and I thought, wow, this is unusual. And I'm here now trying to work out the kind of numbers I should put down, bearing in mind that not only is he highly numerate, and one of the world's top mathematicians, but he's also one of the world's best poker players. And this is not a good combination to negotiate with from my perspective. So anyway, I wrote down a salary, and then I crossed it out and put a bit more because I thought he's bound to push me back the other way. And then I did the same for the bonus, and then added a car because I had a car in Vancouver, and I thought, it seems reasonable to ask for one here. And then a few other things, healthcare and all the sort of things that you are lucky enough to get if you're a chief executive of a football club or any company. And then he came back into the room, and I gave him the piece of paper, and he looked at it. He said, well, I can't do that number. And he crossed it out, but I can do that number. That bonus seems a bit high, and he crossed it out and put a lower number, all the things that I expected. And then he eventually gave me the paper back and said, what do you think? I said, well, I'm going to need more salary than that. So I put another number back, and then this went backwards and forwards until eventually he looked at it and said, yes, I can do that. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, I'm happy. Are you happy? I said, yes, I'm happy. He gave me the paper back and said, you sign it. And I said, sign it. So he said, yes, sign it. So I signed it. I gave it back to him. He signed it, and then he folded it up, and then he gave it back to me and said, there you go. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's it. We're done. Like, we shake hands. We're done. So I thought, okay, that's fine. So we shook hands. I agreed to join. I had this piece of paper. I then got on a plane back to Vancouver, and I was expecting to have a full contract sent to me, a proper contract, but nothing came. So eventually I phoned him and said, Tony, it was great to see you a couple of weeks ago. I'm looking forward to joining in a few months' time. I've got the piece of paper you gave me, but I haven't got a contract. He said, no, you have got the contract. That is the contract. And it was a combination of this scrappy piece of paper that we both scribbled on and crossed out and amended and signed, and the handshake that tells you everything you need to know about Tony Bloom. His word is his bond, and his handshake is his confirmation. And from that moment onwards, I was, really lucky to have probably one of, if not the best owner in football. Not only is he hugely talented and committed, financially astute, but he's also a really good human being and someone that you can trust 100% in your dealings with him. So there was the basis, I guess, the foundation for the relationship that we have grown over the last sort of 14 years. And, we've been through many things together here, some very, very good times, some challenging times, some difficult times, but all the while we've been friends as well as colleagues and as well as the boss and the subordinate relationship. But he's had a huge amount of trust and confidence in me to deliver for him. Along with the team that I've got here, a huge number of people that have worked really hard, we have delivered, and we've delivered over a consistent period of time. But it's very much a team effort off the field as it is on the field. This isn't just about what I've done or the work that I've done here. There's a huge amount of people that have worked for me over those 14 years and still work with me today that do the hard work. My job is to try and bring to life Tony's vision, to put in place the right people, the right infrastructure, the right strategy to make that vision a reality. And then I'm relying hugely on the people, the staff, the players, the coaches, the staff behind the scenes to actually do their jobs to the best of their ability. And, over many years now, they've done just that. And we've been able to compete with some of the biggest clubs in the world with far greater budgets than us and compete against them successfully. But there's also a long way still for us to go. We're on a journey here, and the journey is nowhere near finished. So there's plenty of work left for me to do, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've said before a few times that you're on this journey and you feel like you haven't fulfilled your full potential yet, which is remarkable hearing that. That just gives us insight into your mindsets. The other thing you said, which is notable and is obviously relevant to what you just mentioned about your discussions and your sort of like back and forth between the Bloom when it comes to the contract situation. You said David Dean once told you, obviously the former vice chairman of Arsenal and the FA, he once told you, you pick your owner, not a job in football. And like, obviously you've clearly done this and some other chief executives have not. What is it that you understood about picking an owner that possibly all the chief executives have not understood?
Well, I think what David meant was that you've really got to understand the motivation of the person that owns the club. Because ultimately, if his motivation or her motivation is to try and achieve success overnight, in our combined experience in football, David had been working in football, many decades as well. And between the two of us now, probably we've worked in football for 60, 70 years combined. There are no easy or quick wins in football. Very often success is built over a long period. And therefore, if you've got an owner that's giving you the indication that success can be achieved overnight, that's a warning sign that not only are you being sort of set up for a very difficult task, but you're possibly being set up for failure. Not intentionally, not deliberately, but if you're not careful, you put yourself in a situation where you're at risk. On the other hand, the best owners understand that, first of all, a vision takes time to realize. The infrastructure that you need in order to be a sustained success in football needs to be world-class. That's going to take time and money. It's also going to take good people. It's also going to take a resilience, because there will be bumps in the road, because very, very few teams in the world ever achieve their success without those bumps. And if you've got an owner that recognizes all of that, he's one that you should cling on to. He's one that you should gravitate towards. That advice has always stood me in good stead, because at Tottenham, I had a great owner in Daniel Levy and Joe Lewis. At Vancouver, I had great owners in Greg Kerfoot, in Steve Lusso, in Steve Nash, and in Jeff Mallett. And here at Brighton, I've got a great owner in Tony Bloom. So in the three clubs that I've been lucky enough to work at, all very different sizes in different parts of the world, different parts of the UK. The one consistent thing is that each of the owners have been world-class in their own right and understanding of the business in their own right. And that's enabled me to do the best possible job that I could, because I've not got that daily pressure to achieve success today or tomorrow. They all have understood that it's going to take time, and it's going to take process, and it's going to take investment, and it's going to take a little bit of luck, and there are going to be bumps in the road, and there are going to be setbacks to overcome. And I think when you've got that kind of understanding from your owner, you're actually in a good place. And that's what David meant about picking your owner rather than the club, because there are many clubs that are bigger than this one, bigger than Tottenham, bigger than Vancouver, that might have had more success than all of those three clubs, but might not necessarily have that long-term understanding for how a vision is achieved. But I've been lucky, and I'm not the only one. There are many other very good owners in English football and world football, but I've been lucky enough to work for three great groups of owners, and I'm very proud of that.
Understood. I mean, the brief that Tony gave to you was basically to construct a Premier League setup, even though you were not in the Premier League at that time, not even close at that time. Obviously, this shows you how audacious he is in terms of having an ambition that has no ceiling. And obviously you yourself, because obviously you're tasked with having this sort of like brief or this task and seeing it into reality. My question to you is, what was that like in terms of understanding? Obviously, before you signed, you knew the kind of person you're dealing with in terms of his ambition and his tenacity. But what was that like, understanding that you're being tasked with getting into the holy grail of football in England, the Premier League, and you're not even close to being there, and how you prepared yourself and your staff to understand how to approach this? I know you'd had an internal program for that, But before that, how did you mentally prepare for that? What mental models did you use, and how did you navigate the inevitable friction that will come inside an organization in terms of that audacious vision?
Well, firstly, I was really excited by Tony's vision and the challenge. It just struck a chord with me. I'd been lucky enough to work at World Cups, at European Championships with the FA in England. I'd been lucky enough to work in the Premier League and in European competition with Tottenham. I'd then gone over to North America. I was lucky enough to work in Major League Soccer with Vancouver. And here I was for the first time working, if you like, at the second tier of football. Brighton had just been promoted to the Championship. They'd just opened this stadium, albeit not the size it is today. It was about 18,000 capacity at the time. It's now 32,000. We didn't have a training ground, so we had to find land and build a new training ground, which needed to be world class. We were expanding our season ticket numbers, so we knew we'd have to expand this stadium. So all of that was exciting to me. And in different ways, I'd been involved in various similar projects at Tottenham and at Vancouver. So there was an inherent confidence I had that I could do the basic things that were needed to be done. But I also found it really exciting that Tony effectively gave me a clean sheet of paper and said, look, this is the vision. Go away and decide how you want to bring that to life. That's your job, not mine. That's what I'm hiring you for. And so, almost for the first time in my entire career, I had this blank sheet of paper where I could work out step by step how to do this. And I sort of focused on sort of four things, really, people, infrastructure, process and policies, and all of those things leading then to performance. And I kind of put various jobs that I had to do into those different boxes, and then started to bring people alongside me that I felt could deliver. And we knew that it was going to be a long journey, and some of the people that we brought in would be there for part of that journey, some for a longer part of the journey, and some of those people are still here with me today and have been on the whole journey so far. And football clubs are like that. They evolve, and the need for different skills and capability changes over time as you go up through the levels, as does your infrastructure. That has to improve and expand and become even better. And you need to evolve your policies and processes to ensure that you continue to be world-class in everything that you do. Different stages of that journey, we've had different mantras, different philosophies, ever so slightly different visions, all leading ultimately to the same thing. But at each stage of the journey, you need different processes and campaigns to motivate the staff to the next level and to push people further. And I guess, I've been really lucky here in that all of the things that I'd done in my career up until this point started to come together and collide and combine and actually proved to be hugely valuable, whether it was the communications and marketing background, whether it was the understanding of management structures through working in some of the big corporate organizations, whether it was the commercial skills that I gained at places like Ogilvy and Barclays, the experience that I gained at Tottenham and Vancouver to bring football knowledge to combine with those different commercial skills. Everything was needed here. And the size of the club meant that it was big enough for me to have a real challenge, but small enough to be able to put my entire arms around it on a daily basis and really understand every single moving part. And as we've got bigger, the different challenge has been having to let go of some of that. I now have a club that is too big for me to have my arms fully around. So I need now to delegate more, to trust some of my executives to do the things that I did on my own largely 12 years ago. And that's been another learning experience for me, another challenge for me. Made lots of mistakes along the way, haven't got everything right. I've had to retrace my steps, our steps on a number of occasions. I've had to hold my hand up to say, look, we've got that wrong. We need to do something different now. But that's been part of the fun here, that Tony and the board here, they don't judge you if you try something and it doesn't work. They don't immediately look to make a change if what you said was going to be successful wasn't successful. Obviously, you need to get more things right than wrong. By definition, that is the way to get the success we've had and the progress we've made. But it's been a brilliant period in my career, and I've genuinely loved every single minute of it because it's been such a brilliant journey. Even the more difficult times, although I can't say they were enjoyable at the time, what they've provided is a degree of resilience in the organization that we've all benefited from, because each setback that you have, if you can overcome it, makes the organization that much stronger. And if the organization is stronger, the next setback that comes along doesn't impact you to anything like the same degree. And over a period of time, all of those different setbacks and all of the resilience that you build give you the chance of actually then competing at the highest level, in the top echelons of the highest level, against clubs that are much bigger and much wealthier in terms of their transfer budgets or their salary budgets, whatever it happens to be. So for all of us, it's been a great experience, and something I don't think I would have wanted ever to have changed in my career. It's just been a brilliant period.
Yeah. I mean, one observation I have is that I'm a big believer that organizations actually the culture of an organization is a reflection of the leader, the head of the organization. So the same can apply to nation states. So the head of a nation state, let's say the US, is a reflection of the times of that country. But back to football, in this sense, you're the head of Brighton. Tony is the chairman, owner of the club. The club obviously has a big emphasis on data when it comes to recruitment. You're not the head of recruitment, but obviously you understand the fascination that everyone attaches to, your collaboration with Star Lizard, Tony's firm. And obviously he's taken attributes of those algorithms and replicated it in-house as a client, which is Brighton. I'm not going to ask about the ins and outs of that because it's not relevant to the sort of like the theme of this discussion. What I want to understand is, obviously, when you deal with data, you're dealing with constant change. You're dealing with not being static, because data changes as a bit gets bigger. You're required to adapt. You're also required to adapt to the technology. That data needs to be refined, and that data needs to be delivered for insights. Now we're in the time of AI. You being the CEO, the chief executive of Brighton, how do you assess the need for implementing more of a human judgment alongside this need for obviously technology and data sets and insights from that in terms of judging not just the players that play on the field, but also the players that play off the field in terms of the staff that you work with? A big firm that does something similar to what I'm trying to hint at is Bridgewater, the firm that Ray Dalio founded. He uses data to inform who he actually employs in the firm. My question basically here is, are you currently doing that for the actual staff that you hire outside of the football playing squad, in terms of who you hire, who you promote, who you keep on, and how you dictate your sort of like review for conversation?
Not specifically. I mean, I think the key thing in football is that we are a people business. We're relying on athletes to perform, coaches to perform, staff behind the scenes to support, fans to come and watch, broadcasters to broadcast. Essentially all of the different elements of our business are human in many ways. And our use of technology is really there to enhance those humans rather than replace those humans. And, who knows, at some point in the future, there may be some of us that are replaced by the technology. But at the moment, we use data to inform our recruitment, primarily on the recruitment of players, but also coaches. We don't tend to use it on non-playing staff, although inevitably we're using technology to research the people that we bring in on the non-footballing side, and therefore degree of AI can be used and is used. And I suspect over the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, we're going to see a lot more AI use in all aspects of our business. But is it going to directly replace the majority of humans? No, I don't think so. Not in our business. Maybe way into the future, we could see quite a transformation, but I don't think certainly in my career lifetime. But the data is not perfect. So we also have to ensure that we're using our own human skills to make judgments as well. And, when it comes to player recruitment, data is the core of how we recruit, because it actually narrows down the number of players across the world that we might be interested in or can afford or fit the attributes that we're looking for. But we also play a lot of store by the character of that player. And that character is very, very rarely assessed just by data alone. I mean, that might form one part of it, but we want to know about what this person is like with their teammates, with their coaches, with sponsors, with media, with the community. What do they do with their family and friends? How do they relax? How do they switch off? So the character of the player or of the coach is as important to us as the technical data that we need to understand about their playing style or their technical attributes. So yeah, it's a fascinating area. It changes and evolves constantly. We're very fortunate that through Star Lizard and Jamestown Analytics, we have access to a huge amount of data that is not just very broad, but is also very deep, and also has very sophisticated interrogation techniques that enables us to really refine the information and to make great use of the data that's there. But as I say, it's not just about the data. It is about the humans as well. It is about the character of those people. And of course, the longer time goes on, the more data we gather, the better we are at interrogating it. We hope that it will actually help refine our processes even further. But at the moment, it's not there to replace humans. It's there to support and complement.
Great, understood. I mean, one thing that I'm fascinated by is Japan. All things Japanese culture is very fascinating because obviously it sits at the core of my life philosophy. You took Brighton to Japan on your first tour, which drew, I think, 68,000 fans to the iconic Tokyo Olympic Stadium. Obviously, you have a Japanese player in the name of Mitoma. But my question to you is, you're a branding expert, you're a marketing person. What was the thinking and the strategy behind this international expansion? What are your fans? What are your plans for Asia as a base to build Brighton and obviously have that commercial appeal grow?
Well, first of all, we were looking to build on our first ever international tour, which was to the United States, which was 3 summers ago now. That was a very successful tour for us in the Premier League Summer Series. We really enjoyed that. We'd also, in the same year, played our first ever European campaign in the Europa League. So we, again, gained more international exposure there. And you're right, because of Kaoru Mitoma's impact on our club and the amount of interest that we had from Japanese fans, we felt that a trip to Japan would be not only appropriate from a football point of view and a commercial point of view, but it was also valuable for American Express, our main partner, because Japan's a key market for them. Also for Nike, another of our key markets, partners, because Japan was a key market for them. And we were also fascinated and delighted to secure Google as a partner for the Japanese tour. And, we have a philosophy here of working with a very small number of top quality brands across the world who value the way we work and our values as an organization, and for whom we can then deliver great value. And the trip to Japan did all of those things. And Kaoru Mitoma was a big part of that, partly because of his huge popularity there, but also because of his willingness and understanding of the commercial elements of football, which is fascinating from my point of view, because a lot of athletes, understandably, are entirely focused on their sport and on their performance. And then there's a relatively sort of small group that also really understand and embrace the wider commercial elements as well. And all of the players here, we're fortunate, we've got a great group that understand how important the sponsors behind me are. But Kaoru, I think, because of his inherent connection with his own country, really understood how important it was for us to go to Japan, to perform well on the pitch, to represent ourselves very well off the pitch, and he was a very big part of that. So we had a fascinating tour, great cultural experience, played some really good football matches there, were beautifully looked after by the people that we met across Japan, and we look forward to going back there at some point in the future for sure.
Yeah, I wish you guys luck when you do that. So final sort of like segment, I basically ask you a quick question and give me a quick answer. First thing that comes to mind. So you previously said the Nelson Mandela encounter was obviously very pivotal for you when you had that opportunity. What do you take from his life and his lessons, life lessons that sort of impact the way you've lived your life?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was an incredible privilege to meet Mr. Mandela at his home in South Africa. I think just understanding what he'd been through and his complete lack of bitterness towards anyone that had held him in captivity, his inherent sort of understanding of everyone's different points of view and trying to bring those together for a common good was incredible, inspiring. And yeah, I think, in meeting him, you realize you were in the presence of greatness. And it's not often that you feel that. And I can't even sort of articulate what that was, but it was a very special meeting that we had and one that I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
You've mentioned that you're big on reading biographies. What's so special about Bill Clinton, in your opinion?
Well, I think, again, regardless of your politics and whether you support his views of the world or not, I don't think anyone can deny his charisma, his presence, his incredible communication skill, like Obama, just this incredible orator, someone who, when he stands up to speak, you want to listen. And again, you may not agree with everything he says or does, likewise with Obama, but But the reality is these are genuine leaders who have an ability to inspire and to gain followership, which is so important if you're trying to change a business, a country, and create a movement of a kind. And yeah, I think again, listening and having had, again, being lucky enough to have met him on one occasion, there was no doubt that he had that incredible ability to inspire just by his presence. And again, some of these ingredients that these great leaders have are hard to articulate, but you genuinely recognize them when you witness them.
So you're big on athleticism. Obviously, your son is also in the fitness industry, as you mentioned. My question here is, you're a big fan of Formula One, cricket, paddle, and obviously you run 5 times a day, as you said. What's
A week, not a day.
sorry, 5 times a week? Yeah, a day would be obviously incomprehensible. But yeah, a week. Thanks for correcting me. How do you rank these sports based off your appeal towards them? So Formula One, cricket, maybe marathon and paddle.
For me, obviously, football is still far out as a number one sport, but Formula One is very close behind in terms of, I think, global interest and global appeal. And they've done a fantastic job in Formula One in expanding their audience and making it more interesting to a larger group of people, particularly the younger audiences, which I find really interesting because football needs to do the same. Paddle is just a great participation sport because I think it's the fastest growing sport in the world now from a participation point of view. And I think it's because it's so accessible. You don't have to be great with a racket. You don't have to be super fit. It's sociable. It's fun. It does help keep you fit, get you fit. And, it's relatively accessible in terms of cost. I mean, I'm sure the cost will continue to come down, which is fantastic, and make it more accessible again. But that's great. And then running for me is just about my mental health and giving me time on my own. No phones, no music. I don't run with anyone. I run against my watch. That's about my only competitor when I'm doing that. But I've always liked to run. When I finished playing football, that was the sport that I wanted to sort of do on a regular basis. And only recently has paddle come along to sort of rival that. And it's been great because it also gives me a little bit more competition. And as you said earlier, I am competitive. I like being competitive, but it's also fun. And it's also an escape from work. And I think, all of our jobs, and particularly if you're running a Premier League football club, there are times when you do need to switch off, even if it's only for 1 hour. Just clearing your mind of what you're dealing with day to day and just focusing on your sport is a good way of protecting your own mental health as well as your physical fitness. And I always find after a game of paddle or after a run, I feel more energized to do this job. So therefore, it must be a good thing. As I get older, I realize just how important it is to have that separation from my office and what I do to switch off from my office. And at the moment, paddle and running and watching Formula One and enjoying some cricket at times as well are the things that I most enjoy.
Final 2 questions. The next 10 years, what do you expect from Brighton? And then the second question would be, what book do you think reflects your life philosophy?
Well, the first one's easier. I think probably the next 10 years for Brighton, I'd like to see us progress further in the Premier League. Our vision is to be a top 10 Premier League club and a top 4 Women's Super League club. I'd like us to sort of consolidate both of those things over the next 10 years, because I think, achieving them a few times, which we've done on the men's side now, not so much the women's yet, is good, but we need to do it on a very consistent basis to say that vision's achieved. So for me, over the next 10 years, that's the challenge. In terms of books, it's very hard to say which one book would sum up my life. As I said before, I love biographies. I love reading about people. I love reading about what people have overcome to achieve in their lives or what they've had to deal with in order to get to where they've got to. And each time I read a biography, I learn a little bit more about what it takes to be the best possible leader or the best possible human being, or a combination ideally. And I will continue to read biographies to give me that kind of guidance and steering that you need to keep learning.
Awesome. And just to finally close this, you said that going to work is a pleasure, not a chore. And I would like to say that obviously this discussion is a reflection of that. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it, Paul.
Thanks, Ibrahim. Really enjoyed it. And thanks very much for your time. I appreciate being on your podcast.
Great. And that's Paul Barber on the podcast. He's been at the helm in football for over 25 years and obviously runs a £500 million operation in the name of Brighton. And if you enjoyed this discussion and enjoyed the insights, please do give us a like and subscribe and share with like-minded folks. Until next time, have a good one. Take care and bye-bye.
Thank you.